whoo, was it a late night last night? Oh, boy. Huh. Well, I won't get into it. Well, I'll leave it at that. Oh, the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Sabzu, the rated R radio star, here with you for, a little Q&A. As we get every Wednesday. Patreon only, of course, to all the lovely and wonderful and obviously very intelligent, based upon many of the questions that I get. I get so many good questions. I don't know when I'm ever going to get to all of them, but some of them are just wonderful. But anyway, thank you to all the lovely, intelligent, blah, blah, what I just said. Patreon subscribers, you really, as I always say, you help make all this go round and round. And we are that shy of getting to the $200 mark a month. And if we can get to the $500 mark a month, that means we can do 2 Sovryn Techs per week. But already you're getting at least a bonus hour from me. And honestly, if I get my way, I've got a bunch of other content coming out this week as well. There was the Microsoft event happened earlier today, which I thought was very interesting. It wasn't as I guess you could say earth-shattering perhaps as last year's Microsoft, kind of their hardware event, whatever you want to call it. Eventually they're probably going to call it like the Surface event or something. But they announced the Surface Studio. There was the new version of the the minor upgrade to the Surface Book. And a bunch of the Surface Studio was that all-in-one. It's kind of the first Windows desktop PC, which people have been asking for as far back as I can remember, like literally back in the Windows 3.1 days, I remember people saying, why can't Microsoft just make their own computer like Apple does, blah, blah, blah. Well, now they finally have. But anyway, I'm going to save that conversation for another special. I kind of teased that when I covered the 10.4 event by Google, was that eventually I'll just do like single, maybe 1 hour episodes where I cover these events as compared to taking up so much precious time within the Sovryn Tech Prime episodes themselves. So I will save it for that. So with all that said, why don't we get into this week's questions? We've I'm going to try and get through at least 4 here. One of them will be fun. I'll save that for the end. And the 2 in the middle are a couple of great tech questions, actually from the same person, but that's totally fine. The questions are so good, I want to get to them. And I have a lot of others to get to in the future, but please don't stop sending them in, because there may be questions that are just far more timely, maybe far more interesting for people. Not to say that any question you ask is very, very important to me and very interesting. I'm not saying that. It's just that some are a little more timely than others. And so if you have a very timely question you want to ask, please send it in to me. Okay, there's the email. My preferred way really to get questions, especially for the Q&A, is through the Patreon Messenger. But you can also ask on Twitter. And honestly, it helps a little bit if you say for Patreon or like hashtag Patreon or hashtag on Patreon or something like that. I want to say I know that some listeners have been sharing the Patreon page alone, recommending to people, hey, you've got to be donating to this and you got to get your hands on this content. I am honored that people have done that. Thank you so much. Sharing, I've been up and down on this, on whether or not how important it is to share, or not how effective it is to share, say, shows, or to, share podcast episodes and all that with other people. I'm starting to find now that it's actually I think they are starting to realize I can't take all these stories. I need some kind of curation, and podcasting makes for great curation. Something Brett Venat of the School Sucks Project talked about when he was on Sovryn Tech a couple weeks ago. And so I think sharing podcasts is kind of becoming like a very valuable thing to do. So if you want to share episodes of Sovryn Tech, please do. If you don't want to, as I always say, I understand why. But anyway, there's quite a few thousand of these people out there now, or, listeners, not quite a few thousand donating on Patreon, unfortunately, though it's fine that they don't. But yeah, let's get it out there. So anyway, thank you so much, for those that do, and for those that have been sharing the Patreon page as well, saying, man, you're getting real value out of this. I really appreciate that. So let's get into the questions. Let's do this. No, I will say quickly, last week's Q&A, I pretty much spent the whole time talking about alien life in the universe and all that. Got a lot of great response from that. Some people shared some very funny content with me that was relative to it about how Drake pretty much, left out a bunch of math. Thankfully, I'm not the only one that said that, even though, I pretty much came up with that independently. That doesn't mean that people can't come up with it, at the same time, of course, or even earlier than me, and I just didn't know it. But I'm really glad that that's out there. I don't know too many people that are doing a good job of debunking the Drake equation. But speaking of that, or not debunking, but just kind of calling a little bit of bullshit on the Drake equation. But speaking of that, and speaking of sharing podcasts. One that I've been sharing, I've kind of made it a point. I've been trying to share on various social media, certain podcasts that I've listened to where an episode was really great. One of which we'll get into later in the show, that personally I consider required listening. This one is somewhat, but what I'm about to mention to you quick is somewhat supplemental. I've mentioned it on Sovryn Tech before. I said, you've got to check out this show. And this show has just gotten better. It's about 20 episodes in. I consider it required listening every week. It is just brilliant. But the Illumination Hour. Okay, now there's a link in the show notes for this Q&A episode. All right, which this would be, is this Q&A episode number 15 or 16? I lost track. But this episode number 20, Clash of Civilizations, this was so good. Now the host is Ellen Stallone. She's a young woman in college doing her thing, but obviously so brilliant. And this episode was so good. It really brought, I almost wonder if she's been listening to a lot of Sex and Science Hour and a lot of Sovryn Tech, because it felt like this beautiful culmination of so many things I've said, where looking back perhaps at some, at even maybe some tribal culture, she breaks into that and integrating that into modern, into our modern civilization, and how the idea of Western civilization, she even came out at the end and she said, it was so great. Oh man. She just comes right out and says, I am not proud to be a part of a civilization that has, that is engaged in so much death, or has been so responsible for so much death and war and so much suffering and all that. And I was just like, oh yeah, you got to listen to it. I'm not doing her any justice in what I'm saying, but I thought it was such a brilliant little it's like an hour long, but that episode 20, you got to go check that out. I thought her presentation was phenomenal. Every episode she's done is great. She even did an episode about alien life and kind of broke down the Drake equation and even mentioned the problems with that. And she also said, independently, she said, look, it's a good, we're probably not going to be leaving the solar system at any point, as humans. And I was like, yeah. And she's obviously a huge Star Trek fan as well. So anyway, you got to check it. The Illumination Hour, Ellen Stallone, she's phenomenal. I mean, she is absolutely phenomenal. So there's a little recommendation for you. I'm probably going to make a couple recommendations throughout this episode, but people seem to like my recommendations. So good. I'll give you some. Anyway, let's get into a couple questions here. One question was, have I ever done a top 10 science fiction book list? Yeah, I do have a notorious series that I call the top 8s because, top 5, top 3, top 10, it's all an arbitrary number. They just give you a number because the human brain seems to like lists. So I do top 8s just to kind of break it up and to stick with a little base 12 math. I will do a top 8. Maybe I'll even do a top 10 or 12. I don't know. Science fiction books. I will line that up as a Patreon special. So that, just to let you know, that's on the way. Another question though, that has to actually do with Sovryn Tech. And I like this, I've labeled it sort of the Sovryn Tech secrets section of a Q&A episode where I tell you a little something, about the show, kind of pulling back the curtain a bit. Not that I am the great and wonderful Oz by any means. But I am in the sense that I'm producing or, that I'm making all this go, happen. I'm very much a, what's a one-man roadshow or something like that. But anyway, so the question had to do with the ads. Because throughout the 4-year, we'll be going on 5 years soon, but throughout the 4-year history of Sovryn Tech, I have, from the very first episode, I have run ads. Now, this is before I had sponsors, okay? Like the sponsors, CryptoCompare.com. I have, Roberts & Roberts Brokerage, and I think I'm actually bringing on another one very, very soon here. So anyway, I'll keep you up on all of that. But I've always run ads for whatever, either it was somebody that I did some kind of exchange with in the past, back when, Sovryn Tech's audience was significantly smaller, or if it was just something I wanted to get out there. Like my most famous ad that I do, and I make different ones all the time, but is for Babylon 5, the television show Babylon 5. I have run a Babylon 5 ad recommending to people to watch Babylon 5 for 4 years now. Every single episode has that, or at least, I mean, there might have been a couple episodes where I didn't have whenever I don't have ads in it, it won't be there. But whenever there are, segments to the show, that ad's been there. And I change it up every 25 episodes, or, maybe a little bit. In fact, it is every 25. I need to change it for episode 200, which is coming up in just a couple weeks. And, I do other ads. Like I have the ad for Knight Rider that's also running. In the past, I've had other ones. I've had custom ones that I've made for myself. Ones that were a call for donations or something like this. I've done all kinds of these wild ads. Now, I've even done ads for Blake 7. Now I do them and I won't spend a lot of time on this. Obviously for like Babylon 5 and some other things, I'm not taking any money for those. I can't. Like it's not even a thing. I really do most of the ads, except for the sponsors, which are growing, and I'm glad about that. And if they fill in all the spots, well, again, this is the thing. Like I said, we have the goal of getting to $500 a month, and then I'll do 2 episodes a week of Sovryn Tech. Also, if I get to a certain point of, like, if I get such and so many sponsors, then I will also by default do 2 episodes a week if I get that many sponsors. And then maybe the $500 goal will just turn into doing 3 episodes of Sovryn Tech a week. Or it'll be something special. You can let me know. It's actually a great thing. Patreon listeners, if you want to let me know what you think is great content, what you would like more of, or what you enjoy, let me know, okay? Because I want to make sure you're getting your value out of making sure that, the main shows can really get out there, effectively for free. Because you're affording me the time to do more of it. So anyway, aside from the sponsors, all those ads, they're totally for fun. I will run an ad for something that I think people maybe haven't been paying attention to, or that they missed throughout history, the history of entertainment or whatever. I used to run an ad for the 1978 Battlestar Galactica because it's one of my favorite shows of all time, and blows away the modern. It's almost an insult to call it a reimagining. Because I don't think there's a whole lot of imagination involved. Ron Moore is a loser. But when it comes to storytelling, anyway, obviously he's done very well for himself in life. I wouldn't take that away from him. I've had dinner with the guy. Okay. I know just how much of a schmuck he really, he is when you kind of corner him on stuff. He annoys the hell out of me. But anyway, so yeah, those are they're totally for fun. I make them, I'll cut them from like an old TV ad or something like that, and I'll add in my own little shtick, my own little stuff, and that's how they come to be. As far as how I choose them, yeah, it's just what I'm feeling. It's like whatever I feel like plugging. The Knight Rider ad actually that I've been running off and on as late is pretty timely. Because I just found out, and I'll mention this on the Sovryn Tech Prime episode as well, that Justin Lin, who is the director of Star Trek Beyond, and he's also been the director and kind of the driving force, no pun intended, behind the recent Fast and the Furious movies, which I love. They're my ultimate guilty pleasure. And he is making a machinima, which is kind of a CGI series of Knight Rider now, apparently. And I couldn't be more excited. I think that's fucking great. Now, I hope it's a sequel series. I don't see any reason why he has to do a complete reboot, especially when it's not a live action series, so you don't have to worry about the age of the actors. I mean, just do a sequel. So we'll see how that shapes up, how that works out. But anyway, I'll talk about that more in Sovryn Tech Prime. But anyway, it's just, I'm glad that I have the Knight Rider ads running, because they're running long before anybody had any fucking clue about this reboot. And, it allows me to say, no, I liked Knight Rider before it was cool again. Which I'll tell you, on a personal level, like I spend, and maybe it's just something that I learned out of high school, because, in school, people always accuse you, oh, you're on the bandwagon, oh, you're only this. Well, I'm never on the bandwagon. I'm always way ahead of the curve on everything. And I spend a lot of time making sure people know that I'm not just liking something because, oh shit, it's new, or it's what everybody's talking about. In fact, I almost make it a point to not talk about what everybody else is talking about. That may be why Sovryn Tech is doing so well, because I do the exact opposite of what everybody else does. So anyway, that's the deal with the ads. Again, for the classic stuff, for the sponsors, yeah, those sponsors pay. For everything else, yeah, I mean, it's just for fun. It's just to fill it in. And I've had them as placeholders because I knew eventually Sovryn Tech, I can't say I knew 100%, but I was very confident in my ability, to get Sovryn Tech to the level to where there'd be, thousands and thousands of listeners, and that, companies, businesses, whatever, would see the value in sponsoring and advertising on the show. Like I said, it wasn't 100%, but I was very confident of that fact, that would end up happening. Just like when I knew I started pushing hard for Patreon and creating exclusive content, I knew people would see the value in it. And now we're a few months in, people have seen the value in it, obviously, because they're sticking with it. And thank you for that. So, in fact, I'll let you in on a little something that I'll be releasing in Patreon, but it'll also be available for free. I was a guest on a podcast earlier this week. It was actually on Monday on a Nathan Frazier's show, who's a really good guy. I like the guy a lot. And he's a listener of Sovryn Tech as well. But he runs his own podcast called the Anarchopreneur Podcast. I love that word, Anarchopreneur. That's so good. But anyway, I was on there and we were talking about personal branding. And, I made the point very clear. You've got to be confident. You've got confidence, real confidence, not the fake it till you make it bullshit that I get sick of. Real confidence in that you know exactly what you're talking about. You know exactly what you're doing. You have absolute control of your faculties of what's going on, which I do. I post my show. I design my website. I do all of that. Everything is under my purview. Okay. Everything is under my direct control. I don't rely on anybody else. That's not to say there aren't advantages to having a team. There is. And maybe someday, I could bring other people on to do certain things for the show. Like I know Brett Venat has people that works with him, which is great. But as it stands, I mean, like to get it to this level, I knew I had to be absolutely confident in everything I am doing. And that's how you start a personal brand. But you've got to be that confident. You've got to know what you're talking about. You got to have that life experience, to know what you're getting into. And yeah, anyway, fortunately I was able to do that. But yeah, anyway, a lot of people, email me and say they love the little fun ads that I do and they recognize them for what they are. Speaking of the Babylon 5 ad, I have a tally of how many people have messaged me or emailed me and have said that they started watching Babylon 5 and they loved it based upon my, just hammering it home every single week on people. In that list, let me look it up. So I know it's above 200. Okay, we're at about 227. Okay, so no, that's an old number. 243. Okay, there we go. 243. So we're up to 243 people, which granted out of, thousands of listeners, of course, granted a lot of those thousands didn't add up until the past couple of years, but 243 people have said, oh yeah, I sat through, a 5-season show with a bunch of movies and all that. just on my recommendation. So thank you. So the ads work, even when I'm not, the only payment I get out of that is that I know the human race still has some taste and that people can recognize great content when they see it. Maybe there's 1,000 people that watched it and they're like, oh, this is shit. And they couldn't get past the first or second season, unfortunately, because you got to do that with Babylon 5. You got to get to that third season. That's when all the magic happens. But whatever. Anyway, I'm glad, the 243 people, that have watched it. Awesome. Good for you. Okay. I wasted 20 minutes on all that. I'm talking about ads and all this shit. Let's get into the questions. I apologize. All right. Cause you're not here, you're not here to listen to me, blow smoke up my own ass. Right. I mean, if you wanted to blow smoke up someone's ass, just buy them a Note 7 or something. Right. Ooh. Okay. So here's a question. Do you think if AI surpasses human intelligence, AI being a reference to artificial general intelligence, it's important to be that particular about it, AGI, surpasses human intelligence in most areas, do you think that humans can enhance their intelligence with cybernetic tech to catch up with AI's intelligence? Now, this is something we've talked about somewhat in the past. On Sovereign Tech Prime episodes, okay, on the main episodes of Sovereign Tech, we talked about how, there's this idea of intelligence augmentation, which is IA instead of AI. And this is a thing. This is something that people really are working on. It is absolutely, very much a reality. Now, before I get into intelligence augmentation, I have something I want to recommend, and that is I listened to a podcast this week. It was actually Triangulation, which is off of the Twit Network. I can't handle a lot of the shows on the Twit Network anymore. They're very tough to listen to because it's kind of a clusterfuck at times where I don't know. I feel like they ignore a lot of elephants in the room, and I know they walk a line of not wanting to become political, but. Well, anyway, but Triangulation, it was episode 270. There's a link in the show notes for this episode of Patreon. Okay. And they had Jerry Kaplan on, and Jerry Kaplan this is a guy that, he has been he has been so knee deep in Silicon Valley for so long. He is an OG. Okay. If there's an original gangsta in the tech world, he's one of them. He is just a classic and has been involved in so many startups over the decades, not just the .com bullshit, long before all that. This guy is absolutely the real deal. He's been involved in it really since the 50s. He just a class act. And he's been, especially with artificial intelligence, he's been there with, along with kind of a personal hero of mine, Marvin Minsky, very, very much involved with them. And so his perspective, when they did this interview, it was like nothing you've ever heard before. Listening to Jerry Kaplan talking to Leo Laporte on Triangulation on episode 270. I want you to listen to this. It's maybe a little over an hour of a podcast. It is the most important hour of a podcast if you are interested in the subject of artificial intelligence, particularly AGI. Okay, you need to hear this episode. I mean it. You need to hear it. All right. If I have to take it and include it in, and play it in its relative entirety in a Sovereign Tech episode to get this information across to people, I fucking will. So you might as well just listen to it now, and maybe give me some feedback on what you thought about it. And then I won't have to do it, because he dropped such a, giant bucket of cold water on the whole artificial intelligence conversation. It was beautiful. I'll sum it up a little bit, but his point being is that when any news story talking about artificial intelligence right now, is just out of touch with reality, is his point. He says, we're not there, which touches on something I've been saying for a while on Sovereign Tech in the past few months. Okay. Now, I've been on a bit of a roller coaster as far as, artificial intelligence. Okay. But one thing I've been saying lately is that, look, Marvin Minsky, these guys back in the 50s and 60s were saying, oh, in 5 years, we're going to have a computer that can think like a human. And I said, and that didn't happen, which has led me to be very skeptical of a lot of the pursuits as late by the big wigs, by the big companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet/Google, and whoever else. Because, when they say, oh, we're going to have this, and this goes true for a lot of different technologies, not just AI. I've applied this. It's like, these people just have like these crazy timelines, okay, to where they say this is going to happen. And it never does. And his point is because it's never going to happen. There is that ineffable, which I've also described, when talking about humans, human intelligence versus artificial intelligence. There is that special bit of ability to leap logic and the fact that there's more to consciousness perhaps than just the brain. A lot of these different ideas where Jerry Kaplan, came out and said the same damn thing. He said, like, look, you're not, he pretty much said you're not going to get computers to think like a human ever. And then Leo Laporte would bring up, well, Ray Kurzweil says, if you don't know the difference, does it really matter? If you don't know the difference that you're not talking to a human being, but you're actually talking to an artificial intelligence, does it really matter? And Jerry Kaplan said, he just wiped the floor with Kurzweil. With all due respect, he said, but look, Kurzweil's way off. His dreams are way off. And yeah, it does actually. And he didn't really get into this, but I'll get into this, is that if if the logic is that, okay, we will never get, and it seems like Kurzweil was kind of conceding this point perhaps, which is interesting. And I've called out Kurzweil. I've said, no, I think his predictions get massaged to where it seems like he's right, but I don't think he's been right because I've read his works. This is not new to Sovereign Tech listeners. I've said this before. I've read his works and I don't think I don't think everything he says has been on the up and up. But the response to the question that if you don't know the difference, whether or not an AI is human or not, does it really matter? I think it does. Because human intelligence is so much more than conversation with another, with another, sapient creature or machine or whatever. Human intelligence, the ability to even get to the point where we can even think about building, artificial intelligence and all that, or even get close, potentially close perhaps, which again, that's arguable, especially if you listen to Jerry Kaplan, is because of this incredibly, I almost want to call it fragmented logic, but I feel like that term would have a that has a negative connotation when I mean it in a very positive fashion, meaning that we don't always, the human brain doesn't work. I've said this many times. It doesn't work A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The human brain can go A, D, C, M, F, X, T. It can skip around. And that's how humanity comes up with such incredible things. That's how art happens. That's how creativity in general happens. We don't want our brains to think like Google organizes information because that is incredibly inefficient when it comes to making quantum leaps in whatever we're doing. And that's how we evolve so fast, right? Or, not how we evolve, but I guess how we, technologically evolve, perhaps is the way to put that. Or even, perhaps culturally evolve, or, all these terms have problems. But I think you take my meaning. So yeah, it does fucking matter, Ray Kurzweil, if you can tell the difference. Or, or if you can't tell the difference. Even if you can't, it still matters because that AI is never going to be able to do what we can do. So it becomes a huge question. I'm telling you, please listen to this episode. In fact, he even got into the transhumanism stuff. Oh, there were some great lines in it where he said, they're talking about, well, what if Ray Kurzweil says we just upload our brains into a computer? And just Jerry comes right out and says, we're so much more than that. He says, look, you're not going to upload grandpa into a computer. Grandpa's dead. That's not grandpa. You got to hear his rationalization behind all that. It was fucking brilliant. So now, like I've said, I've been on somewhat of a roller coaster as far as this goes. I've had times where I think, actually, maybe artificial intelligence has already been here for a very long time. And I've laid out various theories on that, as to why I think that may be the case. But I never had a whole bunch of solid evidence on that fact. But lately, I've been more on the side of that no, they're failing. They're not doing it right. It's screwing up. And one of the things that Jerry Kaplan brings up, which is also a hugely important point, is that even when you walk into the halls of, say, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, whoever's working on artificial intelligence, and you walk into the developer rooms and you ask these guys who are supposedly making what do they call it? Machine learning. That's like their new term for it, for what's supposedly artificial intelligence, blah, blah, blah. They will tell you, no, I'm not working on an AGI and like, they're not. Like, they can show you, look, this is not what he says, I think the guy next door is working on that, because the PR teams for these same companies are like, we are building AI, right? But then you actually ask the people working on the stuff, they're not working on that at all. And they don't know. I mean, and these companies are so huge, they don't really know what another team is working on. And you go ask that other team that they think is actually working on AI, they're not working on AI either. And is it all going to come together like some giant Manhattan project? Actually, the way it's set up, probably not. Especially in some companies like Microsoft, where these teams don't communicate very well. So there's no way that's actually happening. So I'm starting to lean more in the direction myself that AI is just a thing and a machine that can think exactly, or perhaps in superior ways to a human, or in a superior fashion to a human, superior overall, is not going to happen. That's sort of where I'm leaning. I mean, like I said, I've been on a roller coaster. There's times where I think it's inevitable. There's smart people in my life who I know also think it's inevitable, or who do think it's inevitable. But I'm really starting to think quite the opposite, especially when you look into the history of artificial intelligence, and when you take a critical look at a lot of the people and the companies that are supposedly developing this technology, things become very, very mushy. They become very convoluted. And in fact, the other thing that is great that Jerry Kaplan brought up was like the Turing test. The Turing test had nothing to do with developing an AI. It had nothing, and I'm not going to spoil it for you. I want you to go listen to that episode. It is fucking phenomenal. Link is in the show notes for it. It's Triangulation episode 270. Anyway, with Jerry Kaplan. So now let's get into the other aspect of this, and what some would say is perhaps the more interesting aspect of the whole thing. And that is not AI, but IA, intelligence augmentation. Now, like I said, this is something that has been talked about somewhat briefly on Sovryn Tech before, and there are a lot of concerns of very real dangers of enhancing the human brain with various technologies, cybernetics, whatever it ends up being, to do that. And I mean, some of the concerns come down to kind of similar concerns to eugenics. Not so much that not so much that the eugenic program is, say, sterilizing human beings, but in the idea more of like, if we were to take a Star Trek reference, perhaps, or an analogy from Star Trek, would be, you'd end up with a Khan Noonien Singh, okay, where, the classic line from Mr. Spock, superior ability breeds superior ambition. And that becomes a big question. Like, is intelligence augmentation, is, this going to create something far more terrifying than an AI? Because humans come with various traumas and failings, from birth. And are those going to get expressed through new abilities that could really harm, millions, if not billions of people? And that's a legitimate concern to be had. The other concern is these new technologies of intelligence augmentation, are they going to be only something for the elite or the super rich? And then are they going to, just treat everybody else, all the quote unquote, maybe the normies or whatever, or the non-enhanced, are they going to treat them like slaves? Which some would use the argument that they already do, but whatever. Okay. And what happens when this technology comes out and there's still governments, and our government's going to have ultimate control. Who controls the cybernetics? There's a great episode of SG-1, Stargate SG-1, that I reference often, where this population on a planet did have they had cybernetics attached to their brains, and they could access a central computer of information. And this is something that Bill Gates himself has said he was very interested in. Not the episode of SG-1, unfortunately, but the technology of being able to mentally access a gigantic, like this centralized encyclopedia of sorts. It's Encarta on steroids. And so there's people that really want this, is my point. But to the fiction of it, in this SG-1 episode, what would happen is that the population was on this planet that was devastated. And so they were living in this kind of like this little bubble, this protective bubble on the world. And this bubble was failing. This force field that was protecting them from the dangers of the environment outside of it was failing. And so it was shrinking. And as it shrunk, it would actually send people to their deaths outside of this force field. And then because everybody was connected to the central computer where all information was stored, people would, the computer would make them forget that person existed. Like a guy suddenly never knew that he had a wife when he did just the day before. And the SG-1 team was like, hey, where's your wife? And it's like, what? I never had a wife, blah, 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 because their brains are so intricately connected with this central, computer that couldn't possibly lie, right? But what ended up happening is that, the population got down, I don't know, to 100 or less or however many it was. And Daniel Jackson finds books, which the books, were an independent record away from the digital record. That raises an important thought, doesn't it? But these books said, wait a minute, you used to have thousands, hundreds of thousands of people living in this force field. Where did they all go? And eventually, the computer had to fess up that the computer was just trying to save as many people as possible, blah, 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 blah. And so it went to extreme measures, and it offed other people, and it erased everybody's memories. Now, this is a problem with intelligence augmentation. Who controls the database of knowledge? If part of intelligence augmentation, that's an if it's connected to some kind of central store of knowledge. Could there be hash checks against that? But then, is the cybernetic device perhaps that you connect or implant into your brain, is that going to be open source? Can you verify that it's doing exactly what it's doing, right? All of these things are very real concerns when it comes to intelligence augmentations, and there's others. But this is something that a lot of people are working on. In fact, it's a pretty recent story. Actually, October 20th, just a few days ago, Brian Johnson, who not the lead singer or the previous lead singer for AC/DC, as much as I like that guy, Brian Johnson. Here's a story from TechCrunch. I put a link in the show notes. I'm not going to read the whole story to you, but Brian Johnson invests $100 million in Kernel, and that's the name of it, Kernel, to unlock the power of the human brain. I'll just read the first thing here. Earlier this year, former Braintree founder Brian Johnson publicly announced his plans to forge Kernel, a company with the sole purpose of building hardware and software to augment human intelligence. Today, Johnson is investing $100 million of his own money into the concept, looking to rapidly double the size of his team, shore up a portfolio of intellectual property, and prepare for animal and human testing trials for a forthcoming device aimed at reducing cognitive deficiencies for sufferers of conditions like Alzheimer's and dementia. And I'm sure there's going to be more. I can only imagine he has more in mind. Like I could see the same technology that allows, that can solve dementia and Alzheimer's is effectively a technology that perhaps allows you to recall memories better. And so wouldn't everybody be able to make use of a technology like that? Certainly. And I don't have any, in the abstract, I don't really have anything against that idea at all. In fact, I think it's a great idea. It's something that's been explored in other parts of science fiction as well. Earth Final Conflict by Gene Roddenberry. Of course, it was after he died, posthumous. But that explored that to where, you could get an implant up your nose that allowed you to access your memories and, even taste the pizza you were having at one point, right? And other places that, have explored that kind of tech, or like the movie Limitless. I love the movie Limitless, where Eddie Mora can suddenly, create this great cocktail of all of his memories, and make them useful. And that's kind of the whole shtick of that movie. The show was terrible. Don't ever watch the show. But the movie was phenomenal. So anyway, I'm sure that's kind of the push to do that. And they are looking to have something very real in the next 7 to 10 years, according to this article, to do that. And perhaps the most important point is one of the concerns that we just brought up is this going to be something that'll only belong to the super rich? Well, Brian Johnson brings this up particular. He says, quote, "My intent is to build products for billions of people, not just elite or rich." End quote. And that's right in the article. Now, Brian Johnson has been involved. He has, I forget exactly what it's called. It's like called the OS project or something, which the idea is to, he calls it the OS project. Not that he's building a new operating system as much as we do need one of those. I agree. But for computers, but the operating system, he wants to upgrade the firmware for humanity. That's kind of like his whole shtick. And so he, it's kind of like Peter Diamandis's kind of his X Prizes and all that, but this is all about, improving humanity in general. I don't have a whole lot to say about Brian Johnson himself. Of course, Braintree is a company based out of Massachusetts that PayPal eventually bought out a few years ago, it's a payments processor. It's a very popular one, and whatever, it does what it does. They even accept Bitcoin, so kudos for Braintree, right? But so I don't really have a whole lot to say about Brian Johnson himself. He seems to be wanting to do some very good things. And also in that story, he makes it very clear, and this solves another issue, okay, and when I've talked about IA in the past, intelligence augmentation, is that, look, if I can't remove whatever the augmentation is, I'm a little skittish about the whole idea. And he says particularly that they would be able to create a device that could enhance the human brain that does not, that might have to have some close proximity, but does not actually have to be implanted. It's something you could take off. So cool. Now, people could raise a bunch of concerns, go all Black Mirror on me and say that, well, then, that same technology that could just be a little, thing you wear around your ear that you could take off, could be the same thing that could be put into a billboard and could affect everybody, in everybody's mind. Okay. Maybe, I wouldn't write that off. I'm just saying I'm aware, some people might hold that concern. But a couple of the concerns that I have are clearly being addressed by Brian Johnson here, saying that, yeah, okay, we want to get into intelligence augmentation, but, we don't have to do it. We don't have to put it under your skull. And we don't want to make it for the rich, for just the rich and the elite. Good. Now, here's the thing, and before I get into can intelligence augmentation help overall, before I answer that question, which is really what the question was about, we just got a lot of lead up, okay? I will say this, that I think, that concern that it would just be made for the rich or the elite, I think that that's certainly a possibility that could happen outside of Brian Johnson's purview. And I think that the only reason that would happen is not because the technology is expensive. And even if it were, I'll explain that in a second. I think it would only be because they're elitist assholes and they want it for themselves. And they want everybody else to be inferior. That's the only reason for this, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Even if it were the most expensive technology in the world, it makes more sense to raise the, and intelligence is not IQ. It's a whole bunch of different factors. That also comes up in Jerry Kaplan's podcast, where he debunks the whole notion of IQ, which I've told you is bullshit for years on this show. And yet a whole bunch of other anarchists say, oh, we're so much smarter now. IQ's blah, 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 blah. Fuck it. All right, but here's my point. Is that, I'm not talking about raising IQ, but just like the ability to use the brain better. Okay? I'm not talking about IQ. The ability to use the brain better. Why would you not give that to every single human being on the planet? Because one of the problems in the world is that everybody's fucking stupid. That society is built for the average. So get rid of the average. And then we could really get places. Everybody wins when intelligence augmentation, done right, done ethically, and done where the individual is in control, is absolutely in control, When you do it when you do that, the whole world wins. Humanity in general wins. Every individual wins by everybody else having better faculties. It is dumb to only, like the irony of the statement, but it's true. It is dumb to just do intelligence augmentation for the few. It is dumb. It doesn't economically make sense. What makes economic sense is to raise the ability of every single human being. That makes economic sense. To raise the ability of the few, of the quote-unquote 1%, or, whoever, to raise the ability of Larry Page, to raise the ability of, of all these other slapnuts. No. And just them alone? No. Everybody? Yeah, that makes economic sense. And in fact, it's kind of telling that there's not a whole lot more money. This is like, when you read about how Brian Johnson wants to do it. Now, either there's some scientists that we don't know about, some scientific cabal, secret scientific cabal that we have no evidence for, but that already figured out that that's not possible. And that's why they're not doing. Or it just goes to show the importance of why everybody needs access to this stuff. Because why hadn't anybody thought about this fact before? If you have billions of dollars to toss around, if you're Apple, if you're whoever, in fact, honestly, before you go trying to solve death, let's figure out how we can improve the human brain, because then that allows for before you even work on AI. Let's improve the human brain in this way. That way, like everything then you can, who knows what you can figure out, at that point, once you improve the human mind. Now, you want to be careful. There's dangers, but I think it's worth looking into. I think intelligence augmentation, as long as it's something that is optional and can be removed, which Brian Johnson with his kernel project said is is the goals. Yeah, let's do this. Let's work on it. I think it's a great idea. And why every business in the world isn't putting a shit ton more money in it than just $100 million? This should be a $100 billion idea that's getting worked on. So I'm glad somebody's at least looking into it. And unfortunately, there are governments out there. I don't know if hooking up everybody to some, IA device is going to make them realize, holy shit, we don't need governments. Governments are unethical. That'd be nice, but we got to be super. But that just, look, it all just raises the point. You got to be super clear on who has control, who has real control of, say, when these IA devices ever come out. Is it going to be the individual, or is it even some company? Even if it's some company, I wouldn't fucking trust it. Now, to get to the abstract of the actual question, yes, let's say that artificial general intelligence, let's say that the great fears were going to become a reality, that, we're going to end up with Skynet or something like this. Could intelligence augmentation on a human compete with artificial intelligence? Absolutely. I cannot see why it would not. I guess maybe one of the concerns is that if that's sort of the goal, at what point does the human brain stop being at what point does the human stop being the human, and it just ends up becoming the artificial intelligence? If the goal is to beat this artificial intelligence at its own game, that's a real concern. But yeah, I absolutely think, and in fact, there might be ways to where, like the human brain could be a far better foundation than any selection of silicon parts that could comprise an artificial intelligence computer, or whatever. So yeah, I am fully on board that could be a reality, now, but of course, that intelligence augmentation could help us combat, the AI, or, like a malicious AGI or something, or just an AGI with a greater intelligence. Now, all that said, as I've said many times, is one of my favorite sayings: artificial intelligence is no match for natural stupidity. And I know that sounds funny, but it's true. I think it's absolutely true. That like I talked about, those leaps, those quantum leaps in logic that humans can do, can outwit, in my opinion, any artificial intelligence devised. Just by its very nature. Because you would get to Z, because a computer just, like, this is like the human brain does parallel processing, right? And how computers do scaling processing and all that. It has to go in order. A computer has to think A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, right? As to where the human, like I gave the example, the human can think A, E, B, X, N, P, it can skip around and thus can get ahead of the linear track. I really think that the human brain, even if an artificial intelligence existed that, say, we didn't know was that we couldn't tell the difference, say, under the conventional understanding of the Turing test, we couldn't tell the difference whether or not it was a human or not. I think the human intelligence could still outwit, the artificial intelligence. The question of what's superior is, it's a muddy question. I really think it is. But yeah, I think intelligence augmentation is definitely a thing. I think it's something worthy of looking into. I have my concerns, but I have my reservations, but I don't think it's something that we shouldn't be looking into. I think absolutely we should, look into that. So, but keep in mind that the human brain itself, and in fact, who knows? Like, I don't think we've perhaps rarely, if ever, seen what human intelligence, what the human mind really looks like, say, if it goes from day one, from birth to adult, with either no traumas or far fewer traumas, based upon failings of parenting and of society. Who knows what that brain looks like? That might be incredible. That might put Einstein to shame, or Tesla to shame. So, there's questions of, I think it's a very real statement to say that the human brain has yet to even reach its actual potential. Like we've never seen it. What a great human mind, perhaps what a truly great human mind looks like. And maybe AI could never beat that. Really. So anyway, but that's speculation. I'm being very speculative in that. Some of the other things I said here were speculation, but there you go. So anyway, kudos to Brian Johnson. I'm very intrigued by what he's working on there. So we've gone really long on that topic. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to get into the other question. I guess I could just start touching on it. The other question had to do with, let's see here. Do you think phasing out servers, particularly root DNS servers, would mitigate a lot of security issues occurring on the internet? Okay, I think I can get into this one pretty quickly. I talked about this at the beginning of episode 198 of Sovryn Tech that just came out this past Saturday. I didn't touch on this so directly, but this is obviously a reference to the internet outage of October 21st, 2016, where Dyn, the company Dyn, out of Manchester, New Hampshire, my backyard, Silicon Mill Yard, that's what they call Manchester, the Silicon Mill Yard, that they got DDoS attacked by a bunch of Internet of Things to be hacked devices. Internet of Things devices. And because Dyn, even though they weren't really hosting a lot of the content, a lot of the data for, say, Twitter or Netflix or some other companies, they were the root DNS server, like mentioned in the question. They were the root server where the phone book looked to. So when that went down, even though the servers for a lot of these companies were fine, the sites went down effectively, or they appeared to be down. If we phased out servers and we went to a more peer-to-peer model, absolutely, no doubt about it, that you would be looking at solving this problem of what happened on October 21st, to where you have full-on outages. Now, however, a lot of the peer-to-peer ideas that are out there, okay, and you got to be, I want to be clear on this. A lot of the peer-to-peer ideas out there may not work so well, or may not be as quick or as efficient as a big iron system, as they call it, or as a server-based, say, network. Okay, for example, a lot of people have brought up the fact that, like Ethereum, okay? Ethereum, the blockchain-based technology, Ethereum wants to, they want, how to put this? It wants to replace like every service. It wants to be the new internet, blah, blah, blah. And yet they've shown how there's a lot of use cases that networks traditionally do where Ethereum is just so terrible at it, not because of a failing in Ethereum, but in the fact that peer-to-peer just makes the process way too fucking slow. All right, so I think what needs to... So here's the thing. Here's my point in saying all this, okay? Is that for there to be... for us to have a more peer-to-peer culture, more peer-to-peer networks, mesh networking, all of that, I think the very nature of commerce needs to change. The very nature of how we interact with each other needs to change. I mean, it's a point I've brought up many times on Sovereign Tech, and that is that really, like, a lot of the technologies that exist out there, I'm not saying the technologies are unethical to exist, okay? Technology is just a tool, but I will say this, humans aren't ready for them. Humans aren't ready for the internet. They're not. That's the problem. When you look at like all the abuse on Twitter, you look at all the abuse on all these various technologies, blah, 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 and all these terrible things that happen because of it, even the DDoS attacks, themselves, blah, 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 all this shit. It's because humans aren't ready, not because necessarily the technology is flawed. So, you got to get humans to the point to where they can handle, more peer-to-peer networks, I think. And not just humans, but like, say, culture and society and civilization in general. Peer-to-peer networks, in my opinion, aren't going to necessarily... I mean, there's great ideas out there. What is it? There's Freenet. Of course, you have MadeSafe. You have RetroShare. You've got a few of these. You have ZeroNet. You have a few of these things that are... they're trying to be the global internet, while at the same time being peer-to-peer. But these technologies still have some time behind them. And some of them, you have to wonder, are they going to be able to deliver? Or does the question become, is it even possible? These are big questions. But I think that what really needs to happen for peer-to-peer to really take off, and it's a direction I think things really should go. I don't know, I don't want to say life needs to slow down or something like that, because it's not going to. But understand that a lot of the needs for servers come from global, multinational companies, right? But I repeat myself. It comes from it comes from these giant things where, you have people working all over the place, and there's these, thousands and thousands of person teams and all this shit, right? That's where that comes from. Now, here's the big question, is that, and of course, we, on Sovereign Tech, we come from the anarchist perspective. If we were in a world without governments, could gigantic quote unquote, multinational, or global, I should say, because then there wouldn't be nations if there weren't governments, right? But could global companies even exist? Global 100,000, employee companies even exist? Could Google exist? Could Microsoft exist? Could Amazon exist? Could Apple exist? I would argue no. Because most of those companies only exist because they lobby out their competition through government, through the use of government. Okay, they make it difficult for, say, the local guys who, really, I mean, for example, okay, now something that we rip on a lot here is Arcade City, okay, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but one of the ways that they were showing that they kind of tricked people into thinking that there was actually an idea here, or that there was some kind of potential success available, was in Austin when Uber, in Austin, Texas, when Uber and Lyft were banned from the city. People started a Facebook group under the name Arcade City, and they started booking rides through Facebook, through this Facebook group, all right, in Austin. Now, and it was very successful, and it worked wildly. Okay, but understand that really Facebook was just kind of the facilitator, but just some local website, or even some local, honestly, if it was back in the 90s, some BBS could have just cropped up. and could have done the same job. What was really successful wasn't Facebook. What was successful was, was the fact that there was this localized business that could respond quickly, by the second to, the changing legal landscape in Austin, Texas. So that's the thing. So like, what's success? Uber's not successful in Austin. This Facebook group honestly is. All right. And it's not even Arcade City. It's not the app at all. It's just this fucking Facebook group that, where you could set all this stuff up. So that's my point, is that, if these big companies were, and it might sound contradictory based upon the fact that government is what's keeping Uber out of there. Okay. But if these big companies didn't have such a stranglehold on their markets due to usually the government siding with them because of lobbying and all this, then local businesses would wipe the floor and would not only wipe the floor, but could change with the times at any given second and just adapt so quickly, adapt way better than Google or any of these other companies could even dream of doing. In fact, most people admit, or Google will even admit that they suck at local. Why? Because they're this giant fucking global company. They can't do local very well. They only hold on by the fact that they have so many goddamn lobbyists and they have such a great relationship with governments. As to where, you could create like this very quickly, you could create a local map, and then people could have certain like an intersection of how you would access those maps or something like that. And which doesn't have to be a centralized service. Okay. And people, they kill Google Maps in a heartbeat. It'd be eons better. So my point being, was saying all that, is that, without governments, global, massive employee, global companies with large employee bases just would not exist. They couldn't compete with local businesses. They couldn't even dream of it. So, I mean, this goes true for the internet itself. Like everybody's like, oh yeah, Title II, yeah, we got them, net neutrality, yay, hey. But what didn't change when net neutrality got passed? Nothing changed about the last mile. Okay, so cable companies were, you're still not allowed to create an independent cable company or, an independent, ISP, which ISPs traditionally were cable companies. So that's why I said cable company. All right, so, but if companies could move into an area and, without having to worry about the government getting involved in all that, and they could lay down or use alternative technologies like maybe Li-Fi, which is laser-based internet. Like if somebody could come in and set that up and then they connect it at a certain point or whatever. I mean, Time Warner wouldn't stand a chance. AT&T wouldn't stand a chance. But no, they lobby the, local municipalities and then, of course, the federal government and all that to where they get to keep control, of the infrastructure of the internet. All right. But again, if there was no government, these companies could, they're not going to have the force of, they're not going to have, violence to back up their quasi monopolies. So that's the thing. For peer-to-peer to really work, I really do think that you either need to ignore a lot of those big services, or you need to ignore government, or you need to get rid of it and allow, the market to take shape. Because honestly, I think the market would, the internet infrastructure as we know it would automatically become peer-to-peer if there wasn't, some kind of government interference. Much like it was in the 90s, where there wasn't a lot of interference and BBS systems, bulletin board systems, were popping up everywhere. They didn't need any special papers to do anything. They're popping up all over the place. They were their own little internets. Each BBS was really its own little internet. Okay, and it just used the infrastructure that was around to be able to do what it did. And I think if you got rid of a regulatory environment, which is what a government is, you would end up with the same damn thing all over again. So we already have a historical example of how this shit would work. So anyway, that's my whole thoughts on that. Is yes, getting away from servers could make that a reality, but really you're not. I don't want to say they're tied. You can build peer-to-peer systems and ignore people. In fact, that's one of the primary goals I try to push on Sovryn Tech. But understand that getting away from servers, like to where Big Iron is really no longer needed at all, requires somewhat of a different world than we live in. And I think it, to some degree, I think it can happen. In fact, I talked about it on episode 198 of Sovryn Tech, where I said that, I think New Hampshire needs its own internet. Well, that's kind of part of this whole situation, because then you could go peer to peer, and you wouldn't be so reliant on the our server-based internet as it is. So anyway, enough of that. All right, I'll get into the last fun one here, and then I got to stop. I got shit to do. So the question was pretty much, it was, I talked about, was it last week that I got in? Yeah, I think last week I might have talked about the whole music thing, how I didn't like Nirvana and all that, and how I like my music to be about sex and everything. And pretty much, I had people ask me about my favorite, what my favorite band was of all time. I had a few questions kind of similar to this. There is a Sovryn top 8. I mentioned those top 8s earlier. There's ones where I covered a bunch of different heavy metal bands. And there's even one where I covered a bunch of just like regular rock music, I think, or, regular pop music. And in those, I cover a lot of my favorite bands. But to answer the question very simply, my favorite band of all time is Kiss. It's been that way for a very long time. The first song I can really ever remember learning, aside from, the more nursery rhymish stuff. The first, modern song, I guess you could say, that I ever remember learning. Now, I was born in 1981. I remember at 6 years old learning the lyrics to Crazy Nights, which was off of the the titular Kiss album, Crazy Nights. It's the first track on there. I mean, like, I knew the whole rap that Paul Stanley put out. And it just sticks with you. There was a while where maybe I would have said more Motley Crue or maybe Bon Jovi were my favorite bands. But Kiss really just takes it all. They just stand an absolute cut above. Obviously they have history on their side, they're the number one gold record band. Not, maybe that doesn't even mean a whole lot anymore. Or no, it doesn't mean a whole lot anymore. Gold record selling band, in American history, they're just behind the Beatles. I mean, Kiss is a big fucking deal. And a lot of their albums went platinum too. So, just the music is so, and understand when I say my favorite band is Kiss, I am way more of a non-makeup era Kiss fan. I like I like Kiss with the makeup too, but I am that rare fan that thought their best work was from, like 83 to 93. Like, there was that decade of decadence, not to take anything away from Motley Crue's Greatest Hits album, but, from Lick It Up, really, I like to count Creatures of the Night in that, because Ace really wasn't involved in that album. But from Creatures of the Night, which wasn't 83, but from Creatures of the Night all the way to Revenge or Carnival of Souls, which that goes beyond 93 as well. That was 95. From that era, I think is just so good. It is the best music perhaps ever produced by human beings. It is so much fun. It covers in my opinion, the entire human condition: sadness, happiness, sex, lust, all the good stuff. Okay. I think it's phenomenal. That's my favorite. As far as like my favorite Kiss album, oh boy. It's a toss up between Revenge and Asylum. I think Asylum is such an underrated Kiss album. But I love it, track for track. Even the cheesy stuff, like, even Gene Simmons' Trial by Fire, I thought was a great song on there. But Revenge is such a solid fucking album. Like, boy, if they stuck with that sound was so raw, so heavy, so, yeah, you felt it in the genitals. Whatever erogenous zones you have, you feel that album. Revenge is so fucking good. In fact, I remember seeing them play it play some songs from it when Alive 3 came out, which is also my favorite live album by them. But when Alive 3 came out, and they were on the Arsenio Hall show, man, that shit was good. I mean, they were hungry when they played that album. That was crazy. I don't know what got into them. Not to say they ever lost their hunger necessarily, but they, because the album before it, Hot in the Shade, is also, just a great album. But Revenge, like, it's like they were a bunch of 20-year-olds on stage, but they weren't. They were, in their 40s or however old they were at the time. Just great stuff. So yeah, Kiss is definitely my favorite band. I mean, like with me, no answer is really that simple. Like, now, who's my favorite, single musician? Who's my favorite artist? Well, I got to give that to Michael Jackson, but he's not really a band. Michael Jackson is just, that's not news, I think, to anybody. I talk about Michael Jackson all the time. He was the king of pop. He was the greatest. There's no, in my opinion, no question about it. So anyway, there's the answers to that. Yeah, Kiss takes them all. I mean, they're so good, and they have such, man, like part of their whole trick, their whole shtick, their whole magic is that they are bigger than the music. That is so important. And it's something, admittedly, full disclosure, because you're going to hear that episode about personal branding. It's something I try to do with Sovryn Tech, where, I am bigger than the podcast. I try to be bigger than the podcast. I'm not saying me personally. I like to say, kind of the abstracts around, what I'm looking for in life, and anarchism, and what Sovryn Tech, what gets talked about on there and all that. Those abstracts, are bigger than the podcast, I like to hope. And actually, with the video game company, they are. In fact, I'll announce this, October 25th. First off, I should say this is getting released on October 26th, but on October 25th is the 210th birthday of who I call my schoolmaster in anarchism, that being Max Stirner. Happy birthday, Max. As I said, I'm very social media. Don't worry, some of us are still calling out the spooks. That including myself, and I've recommended Max Stirner's Ego in Its Own. Whenever anybody's asked me the question, not my favorite band, but what I think is the best book on anarchism, I always say that is the text to go to, is the Ego in Its Own by Max Stirner. So happy birthday to Max Stirner. Also October 25th, happy birthday or anniversary to Tomb Raider, to Lara Croft. 20 years this year. So in 1996, I remember, she came out on, what was it, 3DO, PC, and the PlayStation was really where she owned it in that year. And I mean, wow, I'm a huge Tomb Raider fan. I every Lara Croft game that comes out, I play. Anyway, and so, but also October 25th is the 2-year anniversary of the creation of my game company, Zomia Offline Games. So, which, we have 2 games under our belts. There's Hyperchronius and Ninja Trek, and a third one is on the way. Hyperchronius 2 is coming, and it's coming very soon. I'll put it to you that way. Okay, I don't want to give you like a super hard date and disappoint. I'm just going to say that it is coming very, very soon. It's coming along very nicely. That's enough. That's enough for this. So lots of celebrations to be had. Certainly, Max, good old Max, Lara, and Zomia Offline Games, the great and powerful Zod. Woo! But enough of that. I think this episode's gone on long enough. Again, thank you all so much to all of the patrons, all the Patreon subscribers to Sovryn Tech. You really help all this happen, every single bit of it, and it means the world to me. So, Carpe Lucem, everybody. I'll see you on the other side. Got a new Sex and Science Hour coming out. Oh, did everybody love that season 3 premiere? and then we've got, things are going to get crazy on Sovryn Tech this week. Yeah, I'll see you then. Woo-hoo.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.